Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really rolling up our sleeves and taking a hard look at the foundational language of music.
We are. We're diving deep into the essential building blocks of all harmony triads and their inversions.
And this isn't just a casual overview. We're pulling this straight from a master syllabus, focusing on what's listed for week 4, the stuff you absolutely need for mastery.
That's right. The mission today is pretty simple. We want to extract the clearest possible definitions and give you concrete, actionable steps.
So by the end of this, you should be able to write, identify, and analyze the 4 fundamental triad types in all their positions confidently.
Exactly. And, the source material calls this whole system tertian harmony.
Which is just a fancy way of saying everything's built on thirds, right?
It is. And if you can lock down this simple 3-note triad now, it's like a massive accelerator for everything that comes later, especially when you get to, say, 7th chords.
It all just clicks into place.
It does. And mastery here isn't about, just memorizing names. It's about really understanding the rules of how they're built and what happens when you move them around.
This is the bedrock.
For centuries of Western music, yes, it's the bedrock.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start with the absolute core definition. What exactly is a triad?
At its most basic, a triad is a chord with 3 notes, and those 3 notes are stacked in intervals of a third.
So 2/3 stacked on top of each other.
Yep. 1/3 from the bottom note to the middle, and another third from the middle note to the top.
And if we're looking at our default, the major triad, what are the names for those 3 individual notes?
They're always named the same way, which is helpful. The bottom note, the one that gives the chord its name, its identity, is the root.
Okay.
And a third above that is, the third. And a fifth above the root is the fifth. Root, third, fifth.
And I hear the term root position all the time. What does that mean visually when I'm looking at music on the page?
Root position is the simplest stack to see. It just means the note that names the chord, the root, is also the lowest sounding note in the chord.
So for a C major triad, C, E, G.
If C is on the bottom, you're in root position. That arrangement is your baseline. It's the starting point for everything else.
Got it. That stack is pretty easy to recognize.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really interesting for me. The 4 flavors or qualities.
Major, minor, augmented, and diminished.
Exactly. These are what define the whole emotional landscape of the music. So how does a learner make sure they can build all 4 every single time without messing up the accidentals?
The key, and this is a huge shortcut, is to understand that the major triad is your template, your starting point.
So you don't have to count all the intervals from scratch every time.
No, please don't. Instead, you just need to master the precise alterations, the specific half-step changes, to turn that major triad into the other 3. It guarantees your accidentals will be right.
Okay, walk me through those rules. Let's say I have C, major C, E, G. How do I get to C minor?
For a minor triad, you change just 1 note. You lower the middle one, the third, by a half step.
So C, E, G becomes?
C, E flat, G. And that's it. That one little half step change in the middle is the entire difference between the sound of major and minor.
So the quality is all in the third. That feels really critical. What about the other 2, the ones that change the overall size of the chord?
Right. Let's do augmented next. For this one, you start with major, so you keep the major third, but you raise the top note, the 5th, by a half step.
C, E, G becomes C, E, G sharp.
Exactly. It stretches the sound. It creates this kind of shimmering, expansive quality.
And then the last one, the smallest, most tense sounding one, the diminished triad.
For the diminished triad, you need to do 2 things. It's the most compact and functionally the most unstable of the 4. You have to lower both the middle note, the third, and the top note, the 5th.
Both by a half step.
Both by a half step. So starting from C major again, you'd get C, E flat, and G flat.
So if I'm looking at, let's say, a C-sharp diminished triad on the page, is the idea to really think through C-sharp major first? Or is there a faster way to recognize it?
That's a great question. It's sort of the rule versus the application. The transformation rule lower, the 3rd and 5th, is absolutely essential for writing it correctly. It's why you'd write G flat and not F sharp, for instance.
Right.
But for faster recognition, the trick is to see its internal structure. A diminished triad is just 2 minor thirds stacked on top of each other.
Ah, okay, so it's much more compressed.
Exactly. And that density is why it sounds so tense and why it functions so powerfully to lead to other chords. That tension just begs to be resolved.
That connection between how it's built, how it sounds, and what it does in the music, that's the real insight.
It is.
Okay, so we've built the 4 qualities in root position. Now let's move the bass note. In real music, the bass is always moving, which brings us to inversions.
Yeah.
What are these different positions, and why do we need those ancient-looking figured bass symbols?
Well, when we talk about inversion, all we're doing is rearranging the notes of the chord so that something other than the root is in the bass.
But the chord itself doesn't change. A C minor is always a C minor.
Never. The root and the quality are fixed. It's just the arrangement that changes. And the figured bass symbols are just a shorthand, a quick numerical way to tell a performer what intervals to build above whatever note is in the bass.
Okay, so we know root position. What's the first move?
That's the first inversion. And that's what you get when the third of the chord is the lowest sounding note.
The middle note moves to the bottom.
Right. And if you count the intervals above that new bass note, you'll find a third and a sixth. So the full symbol is 6/3.
6/3.
But, in practice, because the third is almost always there, it's usually just abbreviated to a simple 6.
So if I see a 6 under a bass note, that immediately tells me that note is the third of whatever chord I'm playing.
Immediately, it's a direct command.
But wait, why are there two symbols then? The 63 and just the 6? Is one more common?
The 6 is much more common. It's all about efficiency. Back in the Baroque era, the figured bass was for the keyboard player. If the composer wanted a triad, they just needed to signal the one interval that defined the inversion,
The 6th.
the 6th above the bass. The third was just assumed to be there. So writing the 3 was often redundant.
That makes sense. Notation is all about efficiency. So what's the final position? The one that always feels a little wobbly.
That would be the second inversion. This is what happens when the fifth of the chord is the lowest sounding note.
The top note moves to the bottom.
Right, and the intervals you get above that bass note are a fourth and a sixth, so the symbol is 64. And you're right to call it wobbly. It's probably the most functionally interesting inversion.
It just feels so unstable. Is there a musical reason for that? Why do we treat it so differently?
Absolutely. The instability comes from the intervals above the bass. You have a fourth against the bass, which in this context acts more like a dissonance that needs to be handled carefully. It wants to resolve.
It's not as grounded as the other positions.
Not at all. And because of that, you usually only find the 64 chord in very specific, predictable situations. Like the cadential 64, where it sets up the final dominant chord, or as a passing 64 that just smooths the connection between two other chords.
Okay, let's try a concrete example to really nail this down. Let's use our C minor triad again. C is the root, E flat is the third, G is the fifth. If you have to write C minor in second inversion, the 64, which note has to be on the bottom?
Well, the definition of second inversion is the fifth in the bass, so the lowest note has to be G.
And the C and E flat can be anywhere else above that.
Anywhere above it. As long as G is in the bass, that chord is a C minor 64. If you can visually spot that the fifth of the chord is in the bass, you know you have a 64. It's that direct.
That makes the visual part really clear. It's not just naming the chord, it's applying that specific figured bass symbol based on what's on the bottom.
Exactly. It's the link between building the chord and writing it down correctly.
Okay, so we have the building blocks, we have the four qualities, we have the three positions with their figured bass labels. So what does this all mean when we get to the final phase analysis? When you're looking at a real piece of music, how do you figure out what you're seeing?
Yeah, the syllabus is very clear on this. It lays out a two-step analysis process, and it's designed to stop you from just guessing and force you to be systematic.
Okay, so what's step one?
Determine the root and quality. So you look at all the notes in the chord, no matter where they are, and you mentally stack them up.
You rearrange them in your head?
You rearrange them into the tightest possible stack of thirds. That process will immediately show you which note is the root, and then you can check the intervals to see if it's major, minor, and so on.
So if I see the notes G, C, and E flat scattered around, I mentally stack them up as C, E flat, G. I know C is the root, and the E flat tells me it's minor. Step one is done.
Perfect. Then you go to step 2. Determine the inversion and labeling.
Which means looking for the lowest note?
You just find the lowest sounding note on the page. In our example, if G is the lowest note you see, you know it's in second inversion and you label it with 64.
And if E flat was the lowest?
First inversion, so you'd label it with a 6. And if C is lowest, it's root position, and you don't need a symbol.
That process? Simplify the stack, then check the bass. That seems absolutely essential for being able to read music quickly.
It is the definition of harmonic literacy. And while the source material mentions that you'll use Roman numerals like I, V, and V later on, this skill is the prerequisite. The figured bass tells you the structure. You have to be able to see that structure first.
So to summarize the whole mastery pass here, you start with that three-note core, the triad built on thirds.
Right. tertian harmony.
Then you master the four qualities: major, minor, augmented, diminished by knowing those precise half-step alterations.
From the major template, yes.
And finally, you master the three positions, the inversions, by identifying which note is lowest and slapping on the right figured bass symbol, 6 or 64.
That's it. Understanding how that simple three-note triad can be twisted and turned, in both its quality and its position, is the absolute gateway to all other harmony. You can't skip this step.
It's essential for more advanced concepts later on.
Completely. Think about something like a secondary dominant chord. When you see a symbol like VIV, you first have to be able to build the V chord in the key of 5E. And that requires total confidence in building a major triad in any position. It all comes back to this.
It really is the constant building block.
It is. We spent this whole time establishing that our musical system, tertian harmony, relies completely on these stacked thirds. It's a system that dominated music for hundreds of years, which leads to a really interesting question for you, the listener, to think about. If this entire tradition is built on thirds, what does it mean when modern composers, people like Schoenberg or Debussy, deliberately started using chordal harmony, music built entirely on stacked fourths? What are they trying to do? That choice isn't just a different sound, it's a profound statement, a deliberate break from the very rules of triad mastery we've just been conquering.